Well, we came for the ref show and we left with a win. The Edmonton Oilers take a 6-5 victory out of Chicago in the midst of an absolutely crazy game. We will talk about that and much more on today's episode of Locked On Oilers.
You're Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to the Locked On Oilers podcast. I am your host and former Oilers game day producer, Brett Holden. On today's episode, we're going to talk about that absolute crapshoot of a game against the Chicago Blackhawks in Chicago. As the Oilers do get the result, but it's the process that we're going to discuss. 17 minor penalties called in that game, as we will discuss the officiating in the second part of today's episode. And of course, in the third period, we will get into the good, the bad, and the ugly on today's episode of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you find your podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Where we're going to start today is with genuinely one of the craziest games I've ever seen in my life. A 6-5 victory for the Edmonton Oilers over the Chicago Blackhawks. A back and forth game, but seemingly the score wasn't really what we were there to see. It was the penalties really the referee's screen time that we were there to see. But we'll talk about that in a little bit, obviously, as it is the story of the game, truly. Let's get into some of the positives and the statistics from last night as Connor McDavid scores another hat-trick this season. He is up to 8 goals this year, 7 more than that guy who scored like 60 last year. I don't know. I forget his name. I think he's in Toronto or something. I don't remember. But Connor McDavid, 8 goals now on the season. He also added an assist to his totals for the season as well. 4 points for Connor McDavid. He just keeps rolling. Leon Draisaitl also upping his totals. He scores the game-winning goal in most Leon Draisaitl fashion. He could miss the backdoor slapper all game, and then he can finally get the squeaker through 3 bodies, including the goaltender, to win the game in general. He also added 2 assists to his total as well last night, and 2 power play points too. He keeps stacking those up. Leon Draisaitl, I know it's Leon Draisaitl, and that was one of his, I believe, his 5th goal of the season, but he's still quietly putting on a lot of points this year. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins scored his 5th goal of the season. 2 more assists add 2 more assists as well to his total. 3 points for him. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is really having a fantastic season, fantastic start to the season here. And he's really driven that offense and as well as that defense. But that offense is what is almost more impressive in his game right now. He hasn't really been able to showcase that over the last couple of years. And now this season, he's been insane on the power play. He has been clutch when he needs to. And he's been exactly what I have said for the last couple of years. And the most underrated first overall draft pick potentially ever. Just a fantastic in all zones and all situations. And he proves it again. Jack Campbell, 31 saves on the surface is not bad. You'd hope for 31 saves from your goaltender in a game. I, all season, have been giving Jack Campbell the benefit of the doubt. He's made the saves when he is needed to, and I'm not going to erase the past of. He has won the Oilers games and kept them in games when the Oilers had no business being in them so far this season. The last night against Chicago was not one of them. A couple of quite weak goals against Jack Campbell. And after the performance we saw from Stuart Skinner, honestly, the performances we've seen from Stuart Skinner, after that, I almost sit there and go, well, you have Stewie. How much more can you play him? Said in our episode on Thursday or on Wednesday. There you go, on Wednesday. I said I don't want to have a controversy, goaltending controversy at all. But do we? Now we're 8 games into the season, and Stuart Skinner has played significantly better than Jack Campbell has in every single one of his games. In fact, I was looking at it just yesterday. Currently, out of every goaltender in the Edmonton Oilers organization that has played at least 15 games in an Edmonton Oilers uniform, the best save percentage out of everybody who has ever played for the Edmonton Oilers, who has ever played goaltender for the Edmonton Oilers 15 times in their career, the best save percentage in Edmonton Oilers history belongs to Stuart Skinner at a 9. He is also 3rd in history for the Edmonton Oilers in goals against average. Again, from after playing at least 50. Again, those are 15 games. Well, for Stuart Skinner, he's up to 17 games. But, that sample size seems rather fair because there's a lot of goaltenders. Like Martin Gerber was around the Edmonton Oilers for what seems like a long time. Not a long time, but more than what it seems like. And he only played in 3 games for the Edmonton. Stuart Skinner has had numerous seasons over the last, numerous games over the last couple of seasons. I think that's fair. Stuart Skinner has given the Edmonton Oilers every reason possible to start getting more starts. Jack Campbell has too. And this game against the Chicago Blackhawks tells me that I think Stuart Skinner needs to get more games. The consistency for Jack Campbell has been the question, the talking point for a while, and I think we're starting to see it. His first few games as the supposedly number 1 goaltender, and he just hasn't been what everybody expects him. Again, I think the numbers are skewed and makes everybody go, oh, okay, well, maybe he's not been doing too well. This was the first game where I feel, there's just not a lot there. He should have saved a good amount of the goals that went by him as opposed to the last couple. And as opposed to how I feel when Stuart Skinner's in net. When the other team's on the power play, I feel confident. I know that he's going to be square to the puck and make a save. Jack Campbell hasn't given me that at least. And I'm starting, not to get a little worried, but I'm starting to question whether or not we should start playing with Skinner more. Let's move on from the crease as well. Evander Kane had quite the night. 2 assists in that game. Should have had a goal added on to that. We will talk about that call a little later on as well. But a great game for Evander Kane. That is the exact type of game for Evander Kane. He can go out there, really get under the skin of the goaltender, the defenseman. Yes, he took that double minor for a cross check. We'll talk about that as well in the next segment, but not something I really hate from Evander Kane. That's his game. That's what you expect. In the end, he was out there for the goal, the game-winning goal. He should have had another goal in the game as well. A good game for him as well. Evan Bouchard, too. Let's wrap up with Evan Bouchard also getting a couple of assists on the night. 2 for him, a couple that he needed as well. A pretty decent road trip so far for him. A little bit of a back and forth game for him. I caught him out of position a couple of times. I think one of those goals he could have battled harder on in front of the net. Either way, he had a stronger game, did what he needed to, and got 2 assists in the game. Chicago Blackhawks went 2 for 10 on the power play. The Oilers killing 8 of those 10 penalties. That was massive for them in that game. And then 3 for 7 for the Edmonton Oilers on the power play. That telling the story as to just how important those penalties were. The Oilers almost 500 on the power play. The Oilers were also out hit 29-4 in that game, a game that the Edmonton Oilers needed to dominate in some way, and they just didn't. And you saw in that hit total as well. Edmonton Oilers, some of those games, they need to find something that's going for them. The hits weren't there. But either way, the Edmonton Oilers are back in action on Saturday against the Calgary Flames in the Battle of Alberta. That is going to be a banger. Speaking of a banger, that's what this game was, but the refs didn't let it be how it should have been. We're going to talk about one of the worst officiating performances I've ever seen in my life in just a second. But first, I want to tell you about our partners over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your #1 source for betting football and the start of the new basketball season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every game. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB. The World Series is tonight. The first game of the World Series is tonight. And I wish both teams could lose. I'm a Dodgers fan, so once it got to the ALCS and the NLCS, I was just hoping any team would lose at the. I was hoping that they would just call it. But either way, if I had to say who I'd prefer to win and who I'd bet on, I guess it would be the Philadelphia Phillies, because I'd be caught dead before I want the Houston Astros to win another World Series. But either way, that's just my Dodgers side talking. You can also find lines for the NHL, UFC, MMA, boxing, golf. They've got, I think, again, Turkish League Soccer. If you haven't watched Turkish League Soccer, by the way, and Galatasaray and Hatayspor the other day was insane. Sam Adekubi, Canadian national, on that Hatayspor team. They won a big match there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen today. Now for your second listen, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter and the most to the biggest stories in the game, Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available in this app, YouTube, and wherever you find your podcasts. Alrighty, let's move into the ref show, shall we? The absolutely... Let me try and find the proper words for this. That was the single worst officiated game I have ever seen in my life. Now, oh my goodness, Brett complaining about referees? What a shock. I know. I think I did it just last week. But after last night's game, I may never do it again. I may never complain about the refs again, because that was a blemish on the league, a blemish on the sport, and one of the saddest excuses for an officiating crew, an officiated game, an official game in the NHL, a professional hockey game I have ever seen. 14 penalties were called in the second period alone. 14. Now, if you're watching or listening to this podcast, I would assume that you know how long a period lasts. How many minutes are in a period? And if you guess 20, well, guess what? You're right. In the second period alone, 28 penalty minutes in the game. In that period. In that period. Not the game, the period. So if you're a mathematician like I am, that means that there were 8 extra minutes in penalties called in the second period. Now, obviously, if you have a big brain, you know that period wasn't entirely played on the power play or special teams in some way. Boy, did it feel that way. Boy, did it feel that way. And guess what? It shouldn't. This isn't NHL hits. This isn't an all-star game. This is the 8th game of the season for two teams that are still trying to get their feet under them. The Edmonton Oilers is the first back-to-back they've had all year on their first road trip of the year. The Chicago Blackhawks, a team who is slated to not do very good this season, is on a 4-game win streak. And they had to play nearly the entire game, at least half for both teams, shorthanded or special teams in some way. Now, when I watch these games, I sit here and I take notes and really try and follow the flow of the game and try and give you the most accurate representation of the game that there is, that I can possibly give you. Everyone gives something different, and that's fine. That's how the world is supposed to be. But genuinely last night after the second period, I had to put my notes down and just not take anything away from the game. Nothing from the game. Because the entire second period was played 5-on-4, 4-on-4. I'm surprised at one point it wasn't 4-on... Well, it was 4-on-3. At some point, I wasn't surprised it wasn't 3-on-3. And we almost had it. Oh, don't you forget we almost had it. Because on top of those 17 penalties called throughout the game, the 14 called in the second period, you also thought that it was necessary to call coincidentals on Tyson Barrie and Sam Lafferty? When it's 4-on-4. 4-on-3, excuse me. It was 4-on-3. The Edmonton Oilers were on the power play. So, just when we lined up off of the face-off after a shot on Stalock was called dead, we still lined up in the exact same manpower that we did just the face-off before. So what was the point? To boost somebody's stats? To make sure Tyson Barrie isn't going to win that elusive Masterson trophy. Whatever the trophy is that you get for not accumulating a penalty in the season. Who cares anymore? The Edmonton Oilers, no Edmonton Oiler is going to get it. Especially any player in the league who plays under that referee. And I meant to get the name of that referee and write it down right here so I could personally And not personally, because that's the wrong way to put it. But somebody has to take the blame. And it's a shame that Jay Woodcroft, Evander Kane, anybody, Luke Richardson, anybody in that game has to go out there and stand in front of the media and answer the questions that are actually for the officials. That is not what hockey is about. Yes, those are two teams that actually have two of the top 5 power plays in the league. But we're not here to see that. Yes, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews have made their living on the power play. But we're not here for that. If we wanted to see anything other than 5-on-5 hockey, well, maybe the All-Star game numbers would be a little higher than they are today. But they're not. That's not what people sign up for. That's not what so many people, and I forget, it was somebody from Oilers Nation tweeted out today. It was low tide. I don't work hard every day to go and watch this 4-on-4 or power play hockey. I don't. You don't. You don't work every day to go and have the officials decide a game. You should be mad too. Because this game, the officials took over. I started this episode saying that, a ref show broke out and the hockey game just happened to finish up. This is Locked On Oilers, not Locked On Officials. This is the Locked On Sports Network, not the Locked On Refereeing Network. The jerseys that are being worn in the crowds last night have Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, Connor McDavid, Darnell Nurse, Leon Draisaitl, Zach Hyman, Evander Kane. They have other players' names on the back of those jerseys and not referee jerseys. This is not for you to put your fingerprints all over. This is for you to police and make sure that things don't get out of hand. But they did. And this whole thing accumulates to the call on Evander Kane's no goal. Because we can talk about that too. Seth Jones shoved him. Well, didn't shove him. He got underneath Evander Kane, lifted his stick, twirled him around, made him land on top of his own goaltender. Then, as Evander Kane's trying to get up, Seth Jones tries to get at him one more time. Evander Kane gets around him. Stalock gets back into position, makes a pretty worthy attempt on the shot, and in fact, he makes the save. And then Evander Kane gets the rebound and scores. Beyond the ability to get back into position and make the play. In fact, he did make the play, and then he didn't. The call on the ice was a goal. There are clear indications of the referee pointing at the net and calling it a goal. So where in the midst of going from calling it a goal to announcing it to the crowd that it was called no goal? Because nobody saw it. And then you have the audacity to come back after the review and say that the call on the ice is confirmed. Confirmed. A shame, a blemish, a game that has most people, including myself, lost for. Because this shouldn't be the second segment of today's show. And it shouldn't be a segment that has taken up this long of today. But here we are. Too bad. But either way, the Edmonton Oilers do come away with the 6-5 win. Hopefully, the officiating will not be the same come Saturday in the Battle of Alberta. Just like, you know what, how it was in the first edition of the Battle of Alberta. But before I blow a gasket, Let's move into the good, the bad, and the ugly from last night. I think we all know what the ugly is, but we'll move away from that. We'll talk about that in just a second, but first, I want to tell you about our partners over at SimpliSafe. The numbers don't lie. In the last decade, over 4 million people have chosen SimpliSafe Home Security to protect their home. You don't earn the trust of that many people without doing something right. At SimpliSafe, your safety is the only thing that matters. I know because I use SimpliSafe in my own home. They'll protect you with cutting-edge security technology powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents who always have your back. With 24/7 professional monitoring, SimpliSafe's agents call you the moment a threat is detected and dispatch police or first responders in case of an emergency, even if you're not home or if you can't be reached. SimpliSafe blankets your home in protection with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and outside your home, smarter ways to detect motion that only alert you when a threat is real. And they even have hazard sensors that instantly detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. Our monitoring experts use proprietary advanced response technology to visually confirm when a break-in is real so you can get the highest priority police dispatch. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplisafe.com/lockedonnhl. Save 20% on your SimpliSafe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplisafe.com/lockedonnhl to learn more. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Alrighty. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen today. I'm sure you could have listened to a lot easier listening today, but I appreciate it. For your second listen, though, make sure you tune in to Locked On Sports today. As mentioned, they have the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reaction, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. The good, the bad, and the ugly from last night's game against the Chicago Blackhawks. There's a lot to choose from that game last night, and yeah, I don't think you'd be shocked by some of these ones. But I'm going to change it up a bit. You've heard enough from me about the you-know-whats. But let's start with the good, and the good for the Edmonton Oilers last night is the resiliency. Something that Jay Woodcroft mentioned in his post-game interview, as well as the Edmonton Oilers were resilient. They did score the first goal of the game, which was big for the team. They needed that to get into the game, but they also needed that because they did go down in the game. They were down 2-1 at the end of the first period. They then went down 3-2 in the second period. We're down 4-3 after tying it, and then as well after coming back and taking the lead 5-4, they gave up the tying goal to make it 5-5, but with 38 seconds left, Leon Draisaitl wins the game for them. A rather back and forth game, and in a game that the Edmonton Oilers trailed 3 times in, the Edmonton Oilers still came back, tied the game 4 times, and won it in the last minute of the game. The Edmonton Oilers can do it in tight 3-1 games, and they can do it in crazy 6-5 games. That's why this win is, despite it being against the Chicago Blackhawks, despite it being in an insane fashion, that is the good thing. The Edmonton Oilers can win in those crazy fashions and be resilient enough to get through all the crap and still win a game, while also being able to suppress the opposition to 1 goal a game and still win that game as well. So the good for the Edmonton Oilers, resiliency. The bad from last night against the Chicago Blackhawks is the flow, as obviously 14 penalties in the second period, 17 total in the game. The Edmonton Oilers did have a good flow to start the game. They obviously scored the first goal of the game as well. Wouldn't say they got into penalty troubles at all in the first period. So the first 20 was a decent flow to the game, back and forth. They got kind of their feet under them after a tough back-to-back as well. But then the second and third period was just so choppy. During the second period notes for myself, I noticed that the 10-minute mark of the second period felt like it was the 1 minute left, the 19-minute mark for that game. So it just felt like an oddly paced game, as Jack Michaels would use one of his vocabulary words. But the bad from that game was just the flow. And obviously, there's proponents to that, and there's reasons as to why. And that is why my ugly for last night's game is the look it has on the league. I already had my little tangent, so I'm not really going to talk about the officiating itself. What I am going to talk about is the fact that everybody's going to take a look at this game and see that 17 penalties were called. 14 in the second period, more penalties in minutes than there are in the period itself. And then you get the goal that's called back on Evander Kane that should have been a goal because you put yourself in that situation. You have taken that call so far out of your hands, it doesn't even matter. And it didn't matter. Once that goal call came back, no one was shocked that it was called back. No one, because in every single possible place that you could have set a precedent, the precedent that you sold to everybody watching that game was that you were incompetent. And the fact that it's coming from both sides. And the fact that at points, when Evan Bouchard was tripped at the start of the third period, I threw my hands up and said, don't call it, please let us play 5-on-5. When there's a hook on Kyler Yamamoto, I go, please don't, just let them play, I don't care. When there's an interference on Ryan McLeod, I go, oh, please, just don't call it, just let them move. I don't care that he could have gotten to the puck. Just let them play. Let them play. The fact that I was actually vocalizing my hope that they wouldn't call penalties on the Chicago Blackhawks shows just the idiocracy of that game. Because it truly did blur the lines of why most people even watch the game. For years, my father has said, I remember from 2006 sitting in Rexall Place watching Jarrett Stoll get a slash on the hands and him sit there in section 128 with his arms folded going, this is why I stopped buying mini packs, season tickets, anything. Because the referees have had so much of their fingerprints on games that people just don't want to watch anymore. As mentioned, we had guys like Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, all power play specialists, and it got to the point where we didn't even want to see them on the power play. It's not a good look. It gives you zero trust in your referee. It gives you zero reason to watch the game, and it makes people feel stupid because they don't even know what a penalty is anymore. It's a shame. It truly is a shame to have that happen in the game. But we're too focused on it. It's the 8th game of the season as the Edmonton Oilers do get their 5th win of the season. They're second on the road. They're second in a row on the road. So once again, the good, the bad, and the ugly from last night's game against the Chicago Blackhawks. The good being the Oilers' resiliency, the bad being the flow of the game, and the ugly being the look it has on the league. Let's wrap it up there, as I hope you have a wonderful weekend. How could you not? We have the Battle of Alberta happening tomorrow night on Hockey Night in Canada. What else could you ask for? I hope you have a wonderful weekend, even despite what we might see in the Battle of Alberta. I shall see you next week. Stay safe, and thankfully, despite that absolute crapshoot of a game, we can play La Bamba, baby.